Good afternoon. I'm Karen Lloyd, a retired Army Aviation Colonel and Director of the Veterans History Project. Thank you for choosing to come to our panel discussion on PTSD and Veterans Correctional Housing Units. It's the second in our ongoing PTSD panel series in collaboration with the National Institute of Corrections. I'd especially like to welcome the members of the Justice Involved Veterans Network in attendance and those watching online, a group of industry professionals who research and produce recommendations on how to help veterans involved in the justice system. It is the work they do that makes these types of discussions possible and so valuable. As an Army veteran, I know how untreated PTSD can affect a veteran's life. Our partners at the National Institute of Corrections know all too well how PTSD can create problems with re-entry into and how it can lead to run-ins with the law and entry into the justice and prison systems. But as you'll learn today, it doesn't have to be this way. We've pulled together several experts who have seen firsthand how treating PTSD and adding structure to a veteran inmate's lives in the Veterans Correctional Housing Units can break the cycle of crime and recidivism. This panel represents just another example of how the Veterans History Project is working to illuminate the work done by a wide variety of organizations that focus on assisting our veterans to move forward with their lives and further enrich their life stories, which we certainly hope they then choose to donate to the library so others can benefit from their experiences. While we had hoped to have Director Inch here with us today, he sent the next best thing, a Marine. Our next speaker is Frank Laura of the U.S. Bureau of Prisons. Mr. Laura is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and is currently the Assistant Director of Correctional Programs Division. Frank Laura began his career as a correctional officer in Seagullville, Texas, where he rose through the ranks, eventually being named warden at the Federal Correctional Complex, Beaumont, where he received the New Warden of the Year award from the Bureau of Prisons. In 2017, he became the Assistant Director of the Correctional Programs Division. So please, help me welcome Assistant Director Laura.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Karen, for that introduction. I'm honored to be here. And we did have a little discussion with the director this morning. So he couldn't make it. He had some unplanned activities that were not on his calendar that showed up. So he feels he regrets not being here. But I did tell him this. I said, well, you're sending a corporal. That's equivalent to a general in the Army. So he took that pretty good. But as Karen mentioned, I've served the Bureau of Prisons for over 26 years in various capacities. I've moved a total of 12 times. This is my second time back in D.C. And actually, I've worked 2 times at Beaumont. One as a lieutenant, and then the second time as a complex warden. So that's one of the best assignments I've had. Prior to joining the Federal Bureau of Prisons, I proudly served in the United States Marine Corps for 4 years and exited the Marine Corps as a corporal. I'm here on behalf of Mark Inch, the Director of the Bureau of Prisons, and the 37,000 staff who serve this agency in our country at our 122 Bureau facilities nationwide. Prior to assuming the directorship, Mr. Inch served as the Provost Marshal General / Commanding General, Criminal Investigative Division, and Army Corrections Command, where he maintained executive management oversight of the Army Corrections System. Every veteran, regardless of when or where they served, or for how long, gave of themselves to ensure that all Americans continue to enjoy the freedoms and opportunities that are the foundation of this country. I know firsthand some of the challenges veterans face as a result of spending time in places and circumstances many cannot even imagine. We are here today to increase the awareness about post-traumatic stress disorder. Some of these men and women who suffer from PTSD struggle to adapt back into society after having served their country. PTSD can also contribute to their involvement in the justice system. Approximately 7%, or 200,000, of the 2.3 million people incarcerated in our nation's jails and prisons are men and women who have served in the armed forces. The majority of these individuals completed service with an honorable discharge. A significant portion of the combat troops are returning home affected by visible and invisible battle scars, including high rates of PTSD and traumatic brain injury, as well as serious serious wounds. Some veterans return home and struggle and find themselves using substances, and others struggle with various forms of mental illness related to their deployments. All of these issues may, in some cases, lead to injustice system involvement and incarceration. Veteran-specific housing units in our correctional environments promotes opportunities to assist veterans in preparation to return to our communities with the skills and confidence to be productive and contributing members of society. The Bureau of Prisons houses nearly 11,000 veterans nationwide across our 122 facilities. The vast majority are male, although we do have a small number of female veterans as well. We have an office devoted to meeting the needs of the groups of special inmates with specialized needs. In December of 2017, we formally recognized the inmate veterans as a special population. We have a wide variety of services for veteran inmates, but we are in the process of standardizing services nationwide. We have developed a three-tiered services delivery model. Tier 1 services have just begun to be rolled out nationwide. These will be available at all facilities and are primarily self-service in nature. They include training, best practices, guidance for staff, and forms and resources that are available to the inmate population. Each facility will collaborate with Veterans Administration staff to ensure inmate veterans and families of veterans have access to the benefits information they need. Tier 2 programs will be rolled out later this year, and these are outpatient services. These will be delivered in a group model and include a veteran support group and a veteran fitness group. Finally, Tier 3 services will be the most intense in nature and will include the piloting of a unit-based residential program using a therapeutic community model. We look forward to collaborating with many of you as we roll out these services nationwide. Today, it is my honor and pleasure to announce the National Institute of Corrections publication entitled Barracks Behind Bars. In veteran-specific housing units, veterans help themselves. This publication tells the stories of both some forward-thinking sheriffs who have instituted veteran-specific housing units in their jails and from some of the inmates who have benefited from these programs. We are seeing a number of these housing units, dorms, or pods for veterans being implemented across the country. This publication is designed to serve as a resource for the field as jurisdictions consider veteran-specific programming. Another great resource in this publication is the sequential intercept model that was adapted to the justice-involved veteran population. As you can see, each decision point provides resources and represents an opportunity to intervene at the lowest level possible to minimize the collateral consequences of a veteran getting more deeply involved in the justice system. Today, you will hear from some of the folks featured in the publication, including our next speaker, Sheriff Peter Koutoujian from Middlesex County, Massachusetts. He is serving his second elected term in the county with a population of almost 1.6 million citizens, the largest county in Massachusetts, and if I'm not mistaken, in all of New England. His focus has been developing a series of initiatives aimed at increasing public confidence, providing a safer working environment for staff, and improving the lives of those in the county's custody, including in 2016 the creation of the Humvee program, a housing unit for military veterans. Ladies and gentlemen, Sheriff Peter Koutoujian.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I want to begin by thanking Director Lloyd and the Library of Congress, A number of us had a tour this morning. This is truly an amazing building that is probably not nearly as appreciated, I know is not nearly as appreciated as it should be, and I appreciate it to a much larger degree now, and I thank you for hosting today's event. To Stephen Amos and Greg Crawford from the National Institute of Corrections, Steve and his team and Greg at the NIC are helping agencies like mine, and many that are here in this room that are watching right now, to innovate our constant sources of support and knowledge for sheriffs across the country. And to Assistant Director Lara, thank you for that kind introduction. And I know you were afraid of my name, and I say you did really well, so thank you very much for that, sir. I am truly honored, I mean this quite sincerely, to be here among such a distinguished group of leaders from across the country, from King County in Washington State to San Francisco to Orange County in Florida to Cuyahoga County in Ohio, New York, Texas, and elsewhere. And on behalf of all of us here and my Middlesex Sheriff's Office, to all that have served our country, I say thank you for your service. While I did not serve in the military, my family has a history of service that has always impacted me. My grandparents came to this country to flee the Armenian genocide. They sought refuge and opportunity in this country, and they found it. 3 of their sons wore the uniform, including my Uncle Jack, who went on to become the Veteran Service Agent in my hometown of Waltham, Massachusetts. My Uncle Arsen, who died in an accident while serving in the Philippines at the age of 19. My grandmother, who could barely speak English, was perhaps not technically, but for all intents and purposes, a Gold Star mother in the loss of her young son. And yet, my grandparents loved this country and everything it had afforded us, the truest of patriots. And I can't just take a moment to just think that how proud they would be to know that their grandson was speaking at the Library of Congress as well, right? It was that appreciation for their service that made me want to do better for incarcerated veterans. After becoming sheriff in 2011, I discovered that we were lacking in verified demographic information on veterans. At the time, the only way we knew if someone was a veteran, if they told us they were a veteran. And so when we spoke about the problem of incarcerated military veterans across this country, we really didn't have an idea, truly, about the scope of this problem because we didn't have verified numbers anywhere across this country. This was incredibly ineffective, and we knew that we would miss folks because sometimes we would know that they were in there, or as they were coming closer to release, they would let us know, but by then it was too late to give them the proper programming while inside or the proper handoff to the supports that they needed. We later learned that the reasons that many were not identifying themselves, they were afraid of losing benefits. Some didn't realize they were qualified as a veteran. For some, it was other stigma or shame of having been in a place of incarceration. And I knew there was a lot more we could be doing to improve the lives of these individuals and their families, and became personally committed to this endeavor. It was at that point we started speaking to the VA about how we could better identify veterans, and it began with the launch of the Veterans Reentry Search Service, or VRSS, developed by the VA. The system allowed us to match our lists of those in our custody against the federal databases. And on day one, we had 19 men in our facility who had self-identified as having served this country. But VRSS immediately told us that that number was wrong. We had another 44 in our care, custody, and control that we didn't know about, bringing our total number to 63. In fact, 2/3 more than we knew about were serving time with us. In this instant, we learned that we had triple the number of our veterans in our custody, and that's why VRSS is such a critical tool and one I believe should be utilized by every correctional facility across this country. That discovery eventually led to the creation of the Housing Unit for Military Veterans, or HUMV, designed in collaboration with administrators and staff and the incarcerated veterans themselves. The unit was opened in January of 16. It's been open for just about 2.5 years, and it was named by the veterans themselves. Ours was not the first, and it certainly won't be the last unit designed for veterans suffering from so many ailments, including PTSD. Because sheriffs and other correctional leaders from Albany to Arizona recognize specially tailored programming for targeted population works. A unique population, a unique solution, unique results. And veterans units in particular work so much more effectively for a number of reasons. One, because of the staffs and the officers, the volunteers and the programmatic staff who are specially trained to work with veterans, the fact there are community resources that can transition to post-release to continue their treatment, including the VA and many nonprofits, and most importantly, because of the veterans themselves, their own drive, their own change. In Middlesex, we found that the simple act of housing the veterans together opened new doors for treatment and rehabilitation. The men who have gone through our Humvee have told us that being out of the general population and among other veterans allowed them to let their guard down, showed them they were not alone, as they felt so isolated and alone before, and allowed them to open up about their trauma and other issues that led to their incarceration, making it a truly therapeutic community. In fact, it was said that it was very much like being back in the service, where in other parts of a correctional facility, you had to watch your back, and in this unit, you knew that you had someone at your back, and you had someone on your left, and you had someone on your right, and all you needed to do was look forward. In our unit, it didn't matter whether you were served in Vietnam or enduring freedom, whether you spent a year on a submarine, you were involved in combat, or you served stateside, or you were discharged honorably or not. And in some instances, the issues that led to a less than honorable discharge are the very same reasons that led to their incarceration as well. If you swore an oath and were willing to protect our freedom, we will consider you for our program. Our experience is not that much different from our colleagues around the nation, many of whom are here today and spoke with such passion and knowledge and expertise. The work that's happening in these units is changing lives and changing families and changing communities and making our communities safer and saving our communities money all at the same time. You can see it in the data. Our own snapshot pegged our recidivism at just 5% for all those that spent a minimum of 30 days in our custody over 2.5 years. 5%. Not only that, we have a parole rate of about 95%. We had a number of revised and rogues, meaning that the sentence given was actually lessened by the courts themselves. We had a number of men that were sent, that were able to remain in our unit instead of going to the state prison system because of the work that we had done with them and the belief in the courts in our program, and countless referrals to veterans treatment courts. That's consistent with other programs like Albany and San Francisco, who have publicly reported other single-digit recidivism rates. So this is not something that is unique to Middlesex. It is happening across this country. And more importantly, you can hear it in the voices and see it in the stories of the veterans themselves. Veterans like Mike, who because of his participation in one of these programs in our program was able to get a revise and revoke and get out much earlier. I was walking at a Labor Day parade, waving at the people on the sides of the parade, and suddenly out of the corner, as I walked by one section up on a hill, I just could hear someone yell out, "Humvee." And as I looked over, I saw a man sitting there by a woman on the hill with his thumb up. And I ran, giving me a thumbs up. I ran up, and it was Mike, and he was doing fabulously well, and yet we had allowed him this opportunity. Or John, who was 2 inches short of killing himself with a shotgun. As he said, if he had another 2 inches of length in his arm, he would have been dead. Came to our facility and progressed so significantly that at one point, he was free to leave on a parole to a bed that parole was providing for him, but a bed that we were going to provide him through Veterans Affairs was not going to be available for another month. By God, he stayed with us for another month in a place of incarceration because he knew he had a bed in a facility that would be fitting for his treatment, and we had a bed following that for the treatment of his PTSD. He stayed in jail an extra month in this program. These are the stories that you hear. Last year, the Washington Examiner asked Pinal County Sheriff Mark Lamb about the idea of veterans units popping up across the country. Mark Lamb is a border sheriff. He is a true cowboy. He's a pretty amazing man and a pretty amazing sheriff. In that, he talked about a visit he made to our facility just to learn what we were doing because he liked the idea. And this is a quote from that newspaper. "It's kind of funny because we're like the odd couple," said Sheriff Lamb. "He's a Democrat liberal from Massachusetts." I'm not sure that was meant in the most fond way down in Arizona. "And I'm a conservative cowboy sheriff out of Arizona, but together as sheriffs, it shows how we work together across this country." With these initiatives, we are showing that veterans, that while they are being held accountable for their actions, we also honor their service. And as it is said, in branches of the military, we will leave no man behind, we show them that we will not leave them behind. Now, it's my honor to introduce James Wright. I will speak from a summary of his summarized summary because his accomplishments are so significant, it is really hard to get them down on one page. Mr. Wright joined the Marine Corps at age 17 in 1957. He served 3 years and then became the first member of his family to graduate from college. He went on to earn a PhD in American history and joined the faculty at Dartmouth College in 1969. He served from 1998 to 2009 as the president of Dartmouth, and for the last 14 years he has been working to support veterans. He has been recognized for this engagement by the Secretary of the Army, the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and the Commander-in-Chief of the Veterans of Foreign Wars. He also has returned to his work as a historian, publishing books that focus on those who serve, those who have borne the battle, A History of America's Wars and Those Who Fought Them in 2012, and Enduring Vietnam, An American Generation and Its War in 2017. It is my great honor to introduce James Wright.
Thank you, Sheriff. You're very kind. And I certainly want to add, I know on behalf of everyone in this room, a salute to you for your own creative and effective leadership in support of veterans. It's really quite impressive what you've done in Middlesex County. I'm pleased to be here to have a chance to join Karen Lloyd, Frank Lara on this program. I thank them for their service and for their continuing work on behalf of veterans. I applaud the commitment of the Bureau of Prisons and the National Institute of Corrections to veterans' issues, and I commend the report that Bernie Edelman of Vietnam Veterans of America and that organization's Incarcerated Veterans Committee have done. I look forward to the panel chaired by Jonathan Elias with his special commitment to telling the stories of veterans. It is an impressive group of panelists who daily engage and work to resolve these issues. My special thanks to Bernie Edelman and to Greg Crawford for their service and for their lifetime commitment to serving those who served. They have made a difference, and they are not yet finished making a difference. Greg, thank you for all you've done to help organize and pull together this program. I also want to acknowledge our hosts here today, the Library of Congress. My personal thanks to Karen Lloyd and the Veterans History Project. This is a very important program. In my book, Enduring Vietnam, I acknowledge how valuable they were in providing personal experiences that enrich my account of those who had fought in Vietnam. Special thanks to Megan Harris of this project for all of her help. Let me do a brief personal account because I think some parts of it are relevant to the subject that we're engaged in today. In the summer of 2005, I made my first visit to Bethesda Naval Hospital. The previous November, I had been very moved and troubled by the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq. I thought about it a lot then. These were kids who were the same age I was when I was in the Marines. These were the same age of students that I saw on the campus of Dartmouth. Indeed, the son of friends of ours across the river in Vermont had been killed in Fallujah, a local Marine. And I thought I wanted to reach out in some way to those who were serving. And a good friend, a retired Marine, said, "Why don't you go down to Bethesda Hospital and visit with the Marines there?" I did in the summer of 2005, and since then, I've been to Bethesda and Walter Reed over 30 times to visit with veterans. I haven't been there for a few years. There are not as many. The wounded veterans pipeline has slowed significantly. When I would go to the hospital, though, my pattern was always the same. I would go bed to bed, and I would ask the patient what happened. And you know, I never once encountered anyone, and you, those of you who know Walter Reed know that these were the most seriously injured and wounded in most cases. I never had anyone balk at telling me what had happened. And then I would engage them in a conversation about their future, about what they hope to do. And I kept reminding them, you have a great future ahead of you. Let's think about what you might do. And I would ask them about their own educational background and plans, and I would try to encourage them to continue with their education. I assured them that they had already demonstrated their discipline, their commitment to serving, and now they needed to prepare themselves for the rest of their lives. They still had so much to do, so much more that they could contribute. I was able to set up an educational counseling program with the American Council on Education at Walter Reed Bethesda, and I went out and raised the money to fund it, to get it started. And nearly 12 years later, it is still in place at Walter Reed, now under the Semper Fi funds organizationally. A few years after that, I was able to work with Senators Jim Webb and John Warner and Chuck Hagel on the post-9/11 GI Bill. We had a meeting over at the Senate office building in February of 2008, and I encouraged them to be sure to include in that legislation something that ended up being called the Yellow Ribbon Program, because that provided an opportunity for private schools to contribute money of their own to match that of the VA, to make certain that private schools were an option for these veterans. And last year, the Congress, with bipartisan unanimity, approved an extension and expansion of that legislation. That was very important, and I think everyone needs to know, everyone needs to recognize that legislation such as this, legislation such as the GI Bill, this is not a thank you for your service gratuity. It may provide an incentive to serve, that would be good. It may provide immediately a fully deserved acknowledgement of having done so, enabling veterans in their transitions back to civilian life. But it is also an investment in the future of this republic. What a resource these veterans can provide if we can enable them and encourage them and provide them the opportunity to pursue it. The ranks of the American military today are filled with volunteers. They do not represent the nation demographically. They tend to be more rural than urban, more heartland than coastal. They're largely from blue-collar, middle-class backgrounds, and they tend disproportionately to come from military families. They constitute less than 1% of the population. And these 21st century wars are the first extended wars in American history with no designated tax to help pay for the wars and no service requirement for citizens of this country. So much for George Washington's reminder that it is necessary to go to, if it is necessary to go to war, all citizens should support this with their treasure and with their service. Not anymore. Not for these wars. These veterans can come home and spend a good part of the rest of their lives helping to pay off the debt of the wars in which they fought. And the vast majority of us go on with our lives. Those who serve in these 21st century wars are the best educated of Americans to serve in any war. They are better educated than their age group as a whole. The armed forces expect at least a high school education. and that's a good positive step. But you know, we all know, unfortunately, a high school education is insufficient in this modern economy. The recent pattern of veterans having higher unemployment rates than non-veterans has been largely the result of their educational background rather than a negative judgment on their military service. The parents and the grandparents of the current veterans came home from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, and if they did not use the GI Bill to pursue an education, they could pretty much count on getting some good jobs at a local factory, a mill, or a mine. And they could really count on knowing that if they worked hard, they could probably have that job until they retired. And then when they did retire, they would have some pension plan to help them. Let's face it, those opportunities are far more limited today, and there is far less likelihood of that lifetime security. The post-9/11 GI Bill offers them an opportunity, set a course for their future. But you know, I learned early on in my conversations that while it is essential to provide the financial support for veterans to continue their education, there was a prior and often more difficult counseling need, and this was to encourage them to do this, to assure them that they could do this. While nearly all of those who have joined the all-volunteer military may be high school graduates, most of them did not take college preparatory courses. They probably have not taken standardized ACT or SAT exams. They often feel unprepared for higher education, and some of them may not be ready. But I have no doubt that they all can be ready. Counseling and convincing them of this is essential, as is follow-up support to encourage them to pursue and to succeed. You see, we have a national need and obligation to try to encourage all students who have never been encouraged. They can do this. And this is where those young men and women with military experience can draw on some greater self-confidence if we can remind them why they should have this greater self-confidence. You know, there's another part of the American military experience, of any military experience, that we need to understand. All of the children in this country, really, human beings across the world, learn as infants to remember two pretty constant things. One is to look out for themselves, avoid any threatening risks, don't go there, don't touch that, look carefully, be cautious. And they are also told not to harm others. And the latter is more than parental guidance, as it is emphasized under threat of law, as well as moral code and religious teachings. Do not bring harm to other people. Think of it, a very small fraction of our citizens in their late teens and early 20s, when they're mobilized for war, they are told they have to suppress these fundamental instincts and principles when the situation demands. They must be willing to put themselves in harm's way without question or without hesitation. Go there and do it, they go and do. They don't stop and reflect on it. This looks dangerous. That's not their job. They're told to go. And they must be willing to bring harm to others, lethal harm, without any delay, any opportunity for moral reflection. Should I be doing this? This is their assignment. Now, when they return to civilian life, they're told to return to their first rules, to forget that which they have just learned and to wipe from their memory contrary experiences. Obviously, in each of these instances, this is impossible. The vast majority of combat veterans do return to civilian lives successfully, but they never forget that experience that they had. It's a difficult transition. Some do not return as successfully as others, and indeed, some of this group are a matter for our focus today. We need to know the experience of war from those who were there before we can begin to understand it, to know how profound this experience is, how contrary it is to everything they've been taught and learned. As a Vietnam veteran, Army combat photographer, a friend, Dick Durant's, recently described it, they risk their lives, they face terror, they lose buddies in battles, and then they come home, where they have to square what they had to do as warriors with what they are now expected to do that they are home. It isn't easy. Veterans who are imprisoned for committing a crime face many of the same problems that non-veterans face in transitioning back to civilian life following their release. Problems of employment, of acceptance, of re-entering American society while encountering suspicion at every turn, and finally of avoiding recidivism. This path is harder to avoid if individuals encounter a society that has little confidence in a good outcome. These problems may be compounded for veterans who have been released. They confront dual and reinforcing stereotypes. The current Ban the Box initiative to encourage prospective employers and college admissions applications to discontinue asking questions about criminal convictions is an interesting effort. It's reminiscent to me of Vietnam veterans in the 1970s who came home and didn't acknowledge their military service on job applications because they thought this was something that would be far better for them if their employer didn't have to say, "Are you a veteran? Were you at My Lai?" and ask some of the most foolish questions you could imagine. We've come a great distance medically since post-traumatic stress disorder was recognized as a clinical disorder. But that journey is not over, and the distance remains even greater in accomplishing social acceptance of this mental health condition. The medical, and the legal recognition of PTSD has been so important. We discuss it more openly now. But you know, I also worry that this talking about it more openly ironically has buttressed another cruel stereotype, that of the socially unhinged veteran. The Vietnam veterans in the 1970s came straight in to this headwind, and they encountered movies such as Taxi Driver and Apocalypse Now, in which deranged psychotic veterans emerged. The 1970s were not kind to veterans coming back from an unpopular war. In the early 1970s, on one episode of the popular television show Kojak, Telly Savalas confronted a series of brutal homicides in Manhattan. He told one of his detectives to find out if there are any Vietnam veterans in the neighborhood of the crimes. Think of this. Are there any Vietnam veterans there? PTSD is a companion of all wars. Read Odysseus. But this was not even diagnosed as a clinical condition until 1979. Before that, veterans with problems were categorized as suffering from the Vietnam syndrome, as if it were an isolated condition of what so many other veterans thought of as this whining hippie group coming back from Vietnam. World War II veterans, their parents' generation told them to grow up and get over it. They said, we did. But of course, not all of them did. It was called combat fatigue or shell shock then. The Vietnam veterans spoke of nightmares becoming daymares. One said to me, if those other people had to spend just one night inside my nightmares, they would fall to the floor with tears in their eyes. But you know, these veterans endured, and they have contributed so much to our national life. One thing we've learned is that veterans will speak about their experiences more candidly, more personally with other veterans. Some of the best counseling sessions involve a group of veterans sharing their stories and encouraging one another. If post-9/11 veterans have not had to contend with the same nasty, degrading stereotypes in popular culture, they still have too often to encounter wisps of the fear and prejudice that remain. And here, the reinforcing fear and prejudice and suspicion that confronts the ones who are former convicts and veterans can be even harder to escape. If this is their difficult assignment, I have confidence in them, but our society has a role as well. We still need to thank them for their service and recognize this as not a condescending throwaway gratuity. They need a hand, not a handout, they need a hand. We need to recognize what they did on our behalf, even if they have stumbled since. They have much to offer. You know, Americans today do juggle their views of the current generation of veterans. They applaud them when they're introduced at events. They call them all heroes. And yet, they're also a little bit uneasy around them sometimes. We all need to know them better. We need to understand who they are, what they've endured, what they want to do. These veterans have worked effectively with others of different backgrounds. They've assumed responsibility and accountability. They've functioned in complex organizations in an advanced technological environment. And they've confronted dangerous situations while respecting people of different cultures. They have learned discipline and restraint and self-confidence and tolerance. They have observed and they have themselves offered sacrifice for a greater good. I'm impressed by the options that sheriffs and wardens, such as those speaking here today, officers such as Sheriff Peter Koutoujian and his Middlesex County team, Captain Malik Muhammad of Orange County, Florida, Ron Perez of the San Francisco Sheriff's Department have created to help veterans, Judge Michael Jackson and his initiative in providing veterans courts. Semper Fi, Judge, and thank you for what you've done. Their counseling and the specialized living units that some have developed allow veterans to connect with each other. Remember, they are more comfortable talking to each other. It's an essential step toward their reconnecting with society, with that society that sent them to war. The report, which is released today, and this gathering addressed the value of programs such as these. These veterans have met their obligation. Now we have an obligation to reach out to them. They will benefit from our support, of course, as we all have already greatly benefited from all that they have done. And we and our society will be the better if we are able to help them to succeed. It is truly a win-win. We are all ahead if we can help them to succeed. maybe it's too much delayed, but now we need to say in a delayed reciprocal, we've got your back now. We want to help you. I'm going to hand off the stage to our moderator, Jonathan Elias. Mr. Elias is an award-winning journalist and the host of WJLA's Salute to Veterans. He's an instructor at the Army War College, and he's passionate about veterans issues. Before that, I believe we have a brief video message from Yvonne Simon, an attorney at the Harvard Law School's Veterans Law and Disability Benefits Office. Thank you for participating in this program today. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Evan Simon. I'm an attorney here at Harvard's Veterans Legal Clinic, where my main duty is to find underserved veterans in the community and assist them with legal issues. Today, the National Institute of Corrections has recognized that veterans treatment courts are one method of assisting veterans who are in conflict with the law. However, it's important to realize that only a fraction of veterans are eligible for veterans treatment courts. Many of them will not be able to participate in a diversionary docket or alternatives to sentencing and confinement. NIC is focused on this phenomenon of veterans dorms. Sometimes they're called pods, sometimes they're units, sometimes they're veterans blocks. What these are reserved spaces for veterans to live and interact with one another when they're confined in prisons or jails. And NIC has illuminated that these programs lead to many pathways to positive intervention. These programs draw on the veterans' sense of pride when they adhere to values that they still have embedded in their psyches. These programs promote responsibility for others in much the same way that these veterans work together in military units. These are counterparts to veterans treatment courts. Corrections professionals who are responsible for oversight of inmates, more often than not, attest that these specialized units for veterans promote safety and good order in institutional settings. And while careful consideration should be given to the specific format for a program, it's vital to realize that most correctional institutions already have the essential elements to put these programs in place. We're talking about the space to put veterans in proximity to one another. We're talking about corrections professionals who themselves have military experience. We're talking about the paint to put up slogans and reminders of military service. We're talking about time, the commodity of time to reflect deeply on the manner in which military service has affected the veterans' behavior. And we're also talking about the time to seek important benefits that will help in the future. I'd like to thank those who've served this country in uniform. And especially I'd like to thank those who continue to serve by helping justice-involved veterans reintegrate into our communities as productive and restored citizens.
Well, good afternoon. That's all you got, really? We need a seventh inning stretch around here? I became involved with the military going on 2 decades now. And early on, I was recognizing returning Purple Heart recipients. I just thought, for me, I wanted to say something because I knew a lot of friends of mine that were veterans, and maybe they got beat up or bruised or scarred, and I noticed that the spirit was intact. Their bodies may have been bruised, but their spirit, and I wanted to celebrate that spirit. And I'll never forget this one time, we would just have gatherings of just strangers come together and say, thank you for your service and welcome home, because the transition from military to civilian is very difficult. And I had a 23-year-old corpsman come up to me, good-looking kid, you know, and he looked buttoned down on the outside. And he said, you know, why are you doing this? And all of a sudden he started to tremble and shake and started to cry. And then he just gave me this hug, and it was like holding like one of my little kids after they'd gotten scolded where they're just shaking. And I just sat there and held this kid, and we just talked for a while. And he asked me again, why are you doing this? And I said, well, because everybody should. And then it got me introduced to the whole idea of what PTSD, this window dressing of this buttoned-down, good-looking kid, was really a veneer to something much more painful and something much more deep. And when we spent time talking, he explained to me that war is its own language, and that the language of war is one where there is pain. When you're having a bad day, maybe you get scolded at work, and if you get the boo-boo lip because your boss didn't like something you did. When they have a bad day, they've gone through the birth of a child sitting in some fob in Afghanistan. You have a bad day, maybe you got a ticket on your way to work. When they have a bad day, they step on something that goes boom, and their lives are forever changed because they're losing their legs or their arms, their ability to do anything. Their language of war is so impossible for us to speak. If you've not walked or marched in a battlefield with brothers and sisters to your side and suffered the loss of somebody, it's impossible for you to get your head around that language. And then they come home, and that language is still fresh in their minds. That's the language they speak. And yet here they are on our streets trying to function as normal citizens. It's a very difficult transition. It used to frustrate me that the military didn't do a better job of transitioning. But as it was explained to me by a Marine colonel who's a very good friend and incredibly smart, he said, how do we transition somebody from learning and introducing the language of war and then going to a civilian language once again? So it's incumbent upon all of us, given the fact that these are people who have given their lives for us. They've selflessly decided to sign up and go serve a greater purpose than themselves. They're doing it for country. The least we can do is pay them back. So when he said to me, why are you doing this? And I said, everybody should. Well, let me just introduce you to something. There's 41,000 plus agencies, nonprofits out there that are doing things to help better the lives of veterans. In addition to that, we have leaders within our community that are sitting off to my left here that are trying to help when they come back and they suffer from PTSD. All of them have scars. Those heal. The wounds never heal. The wounds stay with them forever. Some will be able to adapt and get back into life and just try and forget it and put it in their past. And others make bad decisions along the way, and they find themselves in the courts, as we discussed last year, and when it gets worse, they find themselves incarcerated. So do we owe them something when they find themselves making a bad decision and getting incarcerated? You bet we do. I think everybody in America, if you ask them, listen, these are people that went off and fought for you. Do we owe them something? Yes. And as Mr. Wright said, it's not a handout that they're looking for. None of them would take it. A hand up is really all they're looking for, just to get back on their feet. What I'd like to do with our panel is I'm going to ask them if they could briefly. Last year went a little crazy. We got to a 10-minute dissertation. I just want 60 seconds. Please introduce yourself and tell us what it is you are doing right now in 60 seconds, and then we'll start the conversation.
Thank you, Jonathan. My name is Greg Crawford. I'm with the National Institute of Corrections. I'm going to say some thank yous for the group. I want to thank the Library of Congress and Karen Lloyd and Andrew Huber for, again, bringing us back this year. I do want to thank those that have served our country in uniform and also those that continue to serve, whether you're a law enforcement officer or a correctional officer at a jail or a prison or a probation officer or somebody working in a veterans court. Thank you for continuing to serve, and also the veteran peer mentors. I served in the Air Force, but it did shape my life. It helped create structure and discipline, which was much needed. Just ask my father and my mother at the time. But it helped also lead me into working in the criminal justice system. I started working in mental health. I worked 3 years in mental health, and it shaped my philosophy to working with people. You can't treat a piece of the person. You have to treat the entire person, and that's why I think these types of programs, veterans courts and programs and local housing units for jails work so effectively, is because you're treating all of the person. I want to thank James Wright for being here today, for giving such a wonderful keynote speech. Peter Koutoujian, Sheriff Koutoujian, thank you for being here today. And also Frank Laura, who stepped in for Mark Inch. Director Inch, even though he's not here today, I want to thank him because, quite frankly, without his support, we would not be here today, and we would not be releasing this publication today. So if you're listening, thank you. I also want to thank the National Institute of Corrections leadership for supporting veterans initiatives and for being here today. We started with Veterans Treatment Courts, a second chance for vets who've lost their way. That's why we're kind of here last year, and this year we're releasing another publication, and I'm honored to pass it off to my colleague here, Bernie Edelman, who authored both of these publications. Bernie?
Let's see if I can do this in 59. I'm a son of Brooklyn, graduated college, got drafted, spent most of 1970 in Vietnam, that changed my life. I was not a combatant. I was a broadcast specialist, combat correspondent. Spent a lot of time in a hospital, spent a lot of time with a civil affairs unit. Still changed my life. Came back, began a career. Certain things never left me. Participated in a Vietnam art show, brought it to New York City, which is my hometown. And I was named by Mayor Koch to serve on the New York Vietnam Veterans Memorial Commission. As a result of the memorial we did the book Dear America, Letters Home from Vietnam, became an HBO documentary of the same name. Since then, I became the Mayor's Office of Veterans Affairs Director under Ed, the first public official to put his money where his mouth was when it dealt with Vietnam veterans. I've been down here for 15 years now with Vietnam Veterans of America, which is one of the most activist of all the veteran service organizations. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Government Affairs. Technically, though, I'm a lobbyist. Thank you.
My name is Michael Jackson. I'm from the Cleveland area, and I'm a judge at Cuyahoga County Common Pleas Court. I ran as a veteran and was the only veteran, I'm presently the only veteran on our bench. In the Vietnam War, after my college graduation, I joined the Marine Corps and was a first lieutenant commanding a company and a second lieutenant commanding a platoon. Came back, went to law school, married the love of my life who's here today, and practiced law and decided I wanted to be a judge at the end of my career and I wanted to start a veterans treatment court. 3 years ago we had 1 veteran and now we have over 100 veterans in my court, and we started a jail pod connecting our veterans court with those in the county jail, and look forward to exchanging some of those views this afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm Malik Muhammad from Orlando, Florida. I'm currently employed by the Orange County Corrections Department, and I've been there for the last 19 years. I am retired military. I retired in January of this year. The first 6 years of my military career was spent on active duty, and the remainder was spent as a reservist out of Orlando, Florida. And on behalf of my Chief Cornita Riley and our Mayor, Teresa Jacobs, I bring you greetings from Orange County Corrections Department.
Yes, it's me. I'm Ron Perez. I too was drafted. I'm a Vietnam veteran. I was drafted shortly after high school, served in Vietnam from August 1st of 1967 until August of 1968. 1975, I went into the San Francisco County Jail and have been there ever since, working for the Sheriff's Department in their Prisoner Services Division, developing and creating programs. I retired from the Sheriff's Department approximately 2008. Shortly thereafter, they contacted me and said, Ron, remember that veterans program you said we should always start? Well, we're going to do it. So I came back on a consulting basis and the development and implementation of the program. We started our program in 2010. 2013, because we had showed we had a significant population, the Veterans Court started. Our program is called COVER. COVER stands for Community of Veterans Engaged in Restoration. That name was the idea or the brainchild of our veteran service officer. Our sheriff at that time loved having programs that had nice little tidbits that went to him, like sheriff's work furlough and sheriff's work alternative. So he loved restorative justice, and when he heard community of veterans engaged in restoration, he loved it. Part of the reason it was called COVER, the officer from the Veterans Service Office was a retired Air Force military, and you all know if you were in the military, you can't leave your billets without your cover.
Good to have you all here. If you're not familiar with anybody in the room not familiar with how the correction system works, good. We don't have to waste a lot of time. So you know when you're in the corrections, and my wife worked at one of the worst, the New York Times dubbed it the most violent institution for youthful offenders in the free world. So I was really happy when she trotted off to work every day. There was Koutoujian out in California, and it was an absolutely horrible place, very well run and immaculate. I mean, you look at it and think it was a mall when you drove by it. But when I went in and I took a tour, I remembered that there were movements done from certain sections of populations. They literally had to separate the populations for fear that there would be violence. And they were all pretty much high risk because they said anybody between 18 and 25 was probably the most violent or most likely to offend in a population. And that's what we're talking about with most of the veterans. We're talking that age group. So when they go into prison, you would think it would be a no-brainer that you'd segregate that population perhaps, and then you say to yourself, well, why would they segregate that population? What is it about the veterans population that needs segregating? So let's put that to the panel. Why is it a good idea to segregate the population of veterans that find themselves incarcerated? What is it that's going to come from that? Is it productive? Is there a chance that perhaps you'll put them on the path? Or what is the reason for segregating that population? Anybody, please.
Well, I think the basic reason for doing that is that there's something about being a veteran that is different and separate from those who have not served. And to place veterans together, you're recreating a shared military experience. And from my experience, it doesn't matter if the person was in combat or not, served early or served late, but that shared military experience, other veterans understand. And the veterans in our county jail say the same thing that all of the veterans in the publication that you'll have the opportunity to read say in other jails throughout the country, is that it's safer, it's quieter, it's more peaceful, they don't fight. If they do, they solve it themselves. And they respect each other in a way that because they've all served, they may not like each other, but they do respect each other because of that service, and they end up helping each other in that regard. And for those who have drug addictions or mental health addictions or issues, particularly PTSD, being in a quiet, safe place, even if you have to be there in jail, is much better than the general population.
So I went on a few of the site visits for this publication, and I just want to kind of add to what you said, Judge. Another really good thing for this is the efficiency of it. One of the folks that mentioned in Seattle was the fact that the VA could come in one spot. People could come into one spot and talk to people rather than to bounce around to different parts of the correctional facility. So I think efficiency and having those resources all in one spot makes a lot of sense.
And it also helps your outside agencies also. It makes it easier for them because they know that they just have to visit one facility, and they know they can call and check and make sure when they're coming out to do the intake on the veteran that the veteran is there, not in court or being moved somewhere else.
Have you spent a lot of time with the inmates that represent this population? Do you get a sense from some of them that there should have been some sort of intervention? What I found with working with, especially those who came back with PTSD, is that a lot of times they just needed a friend. A lot of times they come back and they feel isolated, lost. They feel that language that they learned overseas, they don't speak it anymore. Nobody in their family understands it, so they just shut down. Is that oftentimes what you find?
We still have a significant population of Vietnam era veterans in our jails, and quite often, very often, they'll say, this is what I needed when I came home from Vietnam. If there was something like this, I would not have spent my entire life in the criminal justice system.
And I've heard similar stories in Orange County. We have veterans that talk about if these programs would have been around when they first got out, maybe, just maybe, they would not have ended up in the criminal justice system. So again, it's a benefit of having them there. And I also believe it starts the process. When you have those veterans together, one of the things the military taught us was camaraderie and the spirit du corps. So by placing all these guys in one dedicated housing unit, you start that treatment process for recovery.
Let's talk about resources for a second, because everybody's so keenly aware that everything costs money. This doesn't strike me as any program, like I know the Middlesex sheriff was talking about the kinds of things that they've done. This is just redirecting as opposed to trying to acquire more money or a budget to put something together. This is just now redirecting resources, right? This isn't something that could be cost prohibitive.
For us in San Francisco, we're extremely lucky because we've had sheriffs for the last 30 years that have concentrated on the development of re-entry services for all prisoners in the jail. So we were able to tap into a lot of already developed programs, tailor them specifically for our veterans.
And if you can do it in San Francisco with no extra money, then it can be done anywhere.
That's correct.
So, let me ask you the same question. Is this something you're finding that you can do by just maybe talking to a few folks, redirecting some assets, not necessarily putting more on the budget line?
We did the exact same thing down in Orlando. We were able to start our unit without using any additional fiscal resources because we had the physical plant space available, and we had a good program in place. It was a relatively easy transition, so I want to let you guys know that it's not a hard process, and you can do it without spending a whole lot of money.
And I want to make the point that I think the first thing you ought to do if you're thinking about this is identify your population, find out how many people you actually have in custody. You know, data will drive a lot of your decisions, right?
Judge, you find that to be an effective tool?
It's exactly the same. It was easy to convince in our jurisdiction. I'm a veteran. The sheriff is a veteran. The deputy sheriff who was in charge of this is a veteran. We both came to this idea at the same time. We just weren't working together. We talked to each other, and we started it within, I think, 60 days after our first meeting. It's just reorganizing the jail and finding a spot that's suitable in the confinement facility, training your guards to deal with veterans differently. Many of the sheriff deputies and the corrections officers who are veterans wanted to participate in this project in the county jail because they were veterans. Some were upset because they were doing that, but by and large, most the veterans wanted to be involved because they sensed that these veterans, with some help, would be on taking the first steps toward recovery.
And we'll talk in a second about the kind of pitfalls that you might run into that might be helpful to somebody. Maybe somebody's watching live and they have a jurisdiction out there that they've been thinking about it, but they haven't done it. Let's get to that in a second. But talk to me for a second about the characteristics of veteran inmates. Are they a different population? Because you have some folks that are just chronic criminals, lifelong criminals, and these people are not going to be fixed or cured of anything. But when veterans come in, do you get a sense they just made a mistake, they made bad decisions, they can be put back on a path quickly? Is it an easy adjust, or what is it?
Veterans seem to fit into a jail setting rather naturally because of the fact that your jails and prisons operate semi-militaristic with inspections, with lineups, etc., with work
structure.
Details, structure, exactly. So a veteran coming into the jail system can fit very easily into that system, and a lot of times what we found before we started our veterans programs, the best workers in the jails that were identified were often veterans, and veterans would come back into jail. Oh, there's Gunny. He's going to run the kitchen. We would see that quite often.
So they feel plugged in. They feel like they have a purpose.
Yep, they can follow the orders. They've got the structure, get up at a certain time, go off to your work detail, come back. Here's your phone call time, here's your meal time, here's your nap time. And so it's much more easier than the world they were living in on the outside where they lost that structure and lost that camaraderie.
That's something that Jim mentioned in his introductory remarks, is reminding them of the confidence that they once had. And I think that that's an important point that I think this type of programming does for veterans, is it kind of gets their sense of self, their purpose back. And I think that that's what it does. It gets their confidence going.
It kind of reacclimates them back to that military life, because jails and prisons are traditionally a paramilitary type organization. So being in that environment, it reacclimates them to what they were once accustomed to. Also, by placing them in positions to where they're working for the jails and doing various things, it gives them a sense of pride again and a sense of leadership. And then also you have that belongingness that they oftentimes seek.
But anytime we send somebody away to prison, the hope is, in the back of the minds, is that justice will be served, that they'll learn their lesson and they'll come back into society. Do you get a sense from veterans when they do make bad decisions, find themselves incarcerated, that they are a population that is much higher at perhaps going back and reacclimating to public life by learning something from prison? I mean, are they successful as candidates coming out of incarceration? I don't know. I'm asking you.
Well, in many of the prisons, particularly in Ohio, and I think it's pretty much nationwide, the veterans in prison have organized themselves, and they've been permitted by prison authorities allowing them to do this, to set up very similar operations than as we're talking about with veterans in the county jail. So if you go to a number of prisons in Ohio, you'll see a veterans pod there. Some of them are even working toward doing productive businesses while in prison that's authorized. And they have their own discipline group among themselves. And they are transitioning to the community by having people come in. In fact, one of the veteran service organizations, the AMVETS, they even have chapters of AMVETS, or like American Legion, VFW, in prisons. And so they are a member of a veterans organization. So it's not as if it doesn't go on there. So hopefully when they transition out, they'll have that foundation that they can recreate and live productive and law-abiding lives. The connection in the jails also is worthy of note when you connect with a veterans treatment court. So I will get those people from the veterans pod in the jail, put them in a veterans treatment court program where they have 4 stages that they have to go through, and when they graduate, they have the ability, we hope, to be self-sustaining.
What kinds of mistakes are some of these veterans making when they come back, when they decide to make bad decisions and find themselves incarcerated? Because I know we have the court system that was set up, we talked about last year, which tries to kind of intervene and get in between some of those veterans that are coming back that have just made minor infractions in the world of the criminal justice system. Some of these, though, I mean, these are very serious charges that they probably never will see the light of day.
Sometimes it can be something as simple as not being in compliance with their medication. We had an individual that came into our system, was a captain, a Rhodes Scholar, a West Point graduate. When he got out of the military, he went and got himself a little plot of land in Alaska that butted up against the forest, and everything was fine except when he came back to visit family in the Bay Area. And he got himself into a situation where he should have been dealt with psychiatrically, but instead wound up being jailed. He came to our attention. We weren't able to get him into cover because of his psychiatric issues, but we were able to get him into Veterans Court, get him stabilized, and it was determined through Veterans Court the best thing to do would be to get him back to his community, back into Alaska where he had veteran services already in place. We were able to do that. We had one of our Veterans Court mentors fly back to Alaska with them, and his Veterans Court status has been transitioned to Alaska. He's still having difficulties, but it was the best place for him. And again, he should never have been in the criminal justice system. He should have been in the mental health system, but got caught up in criminal justice. But because of the efforts of having cover, having Veterans Court, he's not perfect, but he's stable, and he's living day to day.
Sheriff, some of your examples?
I was going to say that just like the technical violations that he mentioned, sometimes I've seen them come back for self-medicating. If they don't take care of the substance abuse issues while they're in custody and get the right treatment, sometimes when times get tough when they're released, they tend to self-medicate and find themselves back in custody due to something as minor as, let's say, failing a drug test.
I think all of the Veterans Treatment Court judges and those involved with helping veterans while in jail all recognize that there are a number of veterans who draw some pretty serious charges. And one of the things we have to distinguish is holding that individual, veteran or not, to be accountable for their conduct. The part that comes into play that's effective for veterans is that to the extent we can, we couple that with a treatment situation. So I just had a case a couple of weeks ago where a veteran had a flashback. He was a combat veteran, Iraq, had a flashback. As I mentioned, 3 police officers were injured. None life-threatening to my knowledge. The 3 officers were given the opportunity at sentencing to say what they wanted to happen to this individual. One said prison, one said, Judge, it's up to you, and the other said, most definitely probation. The person who said probation was a combat veteran. And he understood what was going on with that veteran with regard to a flashback. And so, as a treatment court judge, I have to make that decision with regard to being accountable for that conduct, which was serious, but also make him available to the services that I think would help him. In his situation, he's going to be confined for up to 9 months, maybe a little bit less if he does well, but he's going to be in the Veterans Treatment Court, and he's going to be in the Veterans Pod, and he's going to have access to some treatment during this process.
One of the biggest issues, especially with those veterans coming back with PTSD, especially being in the news business, we're keenly aware of this, is domestic violence. The numbers are just astronomical. And it has to go back, it goes back to the language that I was discussing earlier about the language of war. When you come back, you don't speak the same language. And the language in a relationship is much different. There's an intimacy with a relationship of understanding another person. But that side of veterans, especially those who have seen combat or they've been affected by war in such a meaningful way, that shuts down in them. Breaking through those communication lines. This is one of those opportunities, and unfortunately it comes to prison, and that's what we're talking about with this setting, but in that setting where you have other veterans, they become a support group. It almost, I think it breaks everybody's heart hearing the fact that they have to go to prison in order to find the support group that ultimately could help them on the road to recovery. Is that right?
Absolutely. I interviewed all 22 people in our jail, or talked to them, I didn't interview them, before I came out here, and all of them said essentially the same thing that's in our publication. They use this as a support group among themselves, and so they really are helping themselves. And one of the veterans came up to me and said, you know, Judge, a couple of vets were bad rapping you, and I had to talk to them. I'm not quite sure what he said to them, but one of them, he said he didn't think the punishment was right, and the other vet said, well, you had 4 positive tests for, you know, drug use. What did you expect? So they can have that conversation, and they can talk it out. And whether it's right or wrong, or whether my punishment was too hard or too lean, they had an avenue of talking it out among themselves, and they can hear other sides. And that doesn't generally go on in the population, as I think many of the sheriffs could attest better than I.
And I just wanted to add, you had touched on domestic violence. Our program, we have a component that the Sheriff's Department had this component quite some time ago, Resolve to Stop the Violence, an anti-domestic violence, anti-partner program. It's been adapted actually by the VA and is being provided in San Francisco to veterans. And on the outside, it's called At Ease. We have a component in our cover program. We call it Stand Down, but it deals with the male world belief system and violence and addressing that, but it's geared towards veterans. And I believe it's probably the first one in the country to be started specifically for veterans dealing with domestic violence, because again, that's something that the VA up until this point has not been looking at.
Right.
You know, it strikes me that we feel so good when folks come back from a tour of duty, whether it's in Iraq, Afghanistan, whether it's from Vietnam, they're greeted by their family. And it's supposed to be wonderful, at least it is in the opinion or the eyes of people who see that. There are an awful lot of guys who come back, they ain't got no family. The family is dysfunctional, may have been dysfunctional for years. The family were the brothers and sisters they had in a combat situation. All of a sudden, they find themselves without a support group. They start drinking or drugging. I know of one guy, he was a crew chief on a medevac, a medical evacuation helicopter. He would slosh through blood every day that he was in the air. He came back, couldn't talk, got married, couldn't talk to his wife, lived upstairs of a bar, and for 10 years, he drank himself into oblivion every night. He started having flashbacks on the way to work when he got a different job. His life was all messed up. Nobody told him he had anything wrong with him. He knew there was something the matter, but he didn't know what it was. It took him a long time before there was an intervention and he started getting help that he needed. And a lot of that was through the vet centers, which are one of the most successful operations of the VA. We've often had a fight with the VA to keep that.
So talking about, you know, I wish there was some way to improve from active duty to the VA services, there was a gap. I hate that sometimes the first opportunity to intervene in someone's life is involvement with the justice system. So one of the things that I'm really, this publication focuses on housing units for local jails, and if you think about the continuum of criminal justice between the community and law enforcement and jails and vet courts and prison and reentry, I think what's really important, even though this publication focuses on housing units, it also promotes collaboration between entities within the criminal justice system. I think what's really important for us to think about as people are considering implementing these programs is partnering with other parts of the criminal justice system, because you can not only share resources, but you can improve outcomes if law enforcement's talking to the vet court, and that's something that I've seen on the newest project that we're working on around law enforcement officers responding to veterans in crisis, is we're seeing a sheriff detective or a detective assigned to a vet court, and there's this link between the housing unit, the vet court, and the community, and I think Judge Jackson has done a good job of communicating between the local Jonas vet court, and he was instrumental in setting that up. But I think that that's something that's important to think about, is not just focusing on your own piece, but branching out and communicating within your system.
I think most who are going to hear this will say this is a great idea and kind of one of those no-brainers in life. The question I have is, why wouldn't every correctional house, whether it's a small, local jurisdiction or even a big federal unit, why wouldn't they institute this kind of program and do it right away?
I can't really think of a reason why they wouldn't, but I can share with you from experience upon startup. The hardest thing is just getting buy-in from the stakeholders that currently work there, the public, and your administration. Those are kind of your hurdles when you're initially trying to start a program. And once you get those accomplished or over those 3 hurdles, I think it's a little bit easier. But again, I can't really think of a reason why that we wouldn't look at helping veterans. And I say that because, not just because I'm a veteran, but at some point those men and women that may be in the units that are wearing the inmate uniforms, they wore a uniform, and they decided at some point they were going to protect us. And I think for that, we still owe them.
That's such a great point. I just want to quickly point out that if you are running a vet court or you're running a housing unit, it's really important that you track data, that you justify why this programming is so important. That we all know anecdotally that these programs work and they're effective and that we're reducing recidivism, but if you're listening out there and you're in charge of your data set, make sure you're tracking this and reporting it back and letting us know how effective these are so we can keep building.
Let me ask you this, as general population, how well would veterans do if let's say this program didn't exist, nobody was instituting it, and you stuck a veteran with a minor infraction in general population? What happens to them?
From what I have read and from what I have discussed with folks whom we've interviewed, they get in general population and they don't do well because there's no support system there. They don't want to fight with other guys, but other guys want to fight with them. You need to have something where you can depend on someone, where you can watch his 6, he can watch your 6. That doesn't happen in Gen Pop.
And if they come into general population and don't receive any services, they're going to leave without any services and without any direction, and they're probably going to be back very, very shortly. Or at least with a program such as this, you're at least making them aware what services are available. You're making them aware of what benefits they're eligible for, because a lot of times you'll find that the veteran doesn't realize that he's eligible for any veterans, especially if they have less than an honorable discharge. They think that there's nothing available to them when that's not true.
All right, let's talk about the pitfalls, because there's some jurisdictions probably out there watching right now saying, well, I'd love to do it, but this is going to be a hurdle. Talk to me about some of the issues that sort of stood in the way that you quickly overcame and how you overcame those pitfalls.
The biggest issue for us was probably classifications, getting classifications on board, because obviously classifications is a real key part of it, because they determine whether or not the individual has any gang history, what his sophistication is, and a lot of times that's how an individual is housed. And for a veteran, if he's got some things in his background, that could exclude him from programming. So if you have classifications on board, they know that it's a veteran, you could look at that veteran on a case-by-case basis. Mm-hmm. Why, did you have these gang ties? Can you put those gang ties off to the side? Are you willing to participate in treatment? And for us in California, now they have what's called milestones credits. So whether you're in county jail, whether you're in prison, for your participation in any treatment or any type of programming, that's going to give you time off of your sentence.
Okay.
So that's another.
Let's quickly get some thoughts. Sheriff?
I was going to say just getting buy-in from the staff there. Initially when starting the program, depending on the level of the number of veterans you have in your organizations, you get some form of pushback. That pushback can be in the form of some veterans actually thought by establishing a housing unit that would somehow diminish their service.
Right.
Once you do buy-in and do training with them, they quickly realize that there are some benefits in there by having a program.
Judge?
I can't think of I think the staff issue is the main thing, training the staff, making sure they understand it, and also convincing people outside the community and inside the jail facility that these veterans are not getting a break. They're being put together because, one, there's less problems, less time they're going to be spent in confinement and reduced privileges, and you're going to have necessary fewer guards involved guarding these vets. So there is an advantage that can be assessed that will be a benefit to the veterans and to the jail facility.
Bernie?
I think for anybody who reads this publication, a lot of those answers will be found here. What do you have to overcome? What do you have to think about when you want to set up specialized housing? Call it whatever you want, but what do you have to really consider? And if you have objections, how do you overcome those objections? And realistically, most of the objections can be overcome by just speaking rationally and dealing with any problems if they come up.
Okay, Greg?
I kind of want to talk about the publication as well. We want to encourage folks to read this publication. There are 4 examples of positive things happening in jurisdictions across the country. These are ideas for you to consider. We structured this publication around design, development, implement, and sustain. There's examples from each of these folks, along with King County, Seattle, Washington, and the Humvee, Middlesex County. Each of these folks, I know any of these folks here will gladly give you their time. I thank you for joining us today.
Yep.
Thank you, Jonathan.
My pleasure. Anybody have any questions before we say good afternoon to you? Any questions at all? All right. No questions. Did a great job of explaining it, y'all. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you guys for being here as well.
I guess so.
Good seeing you, Judge. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Judge. Wonderful. Thanks, Malik. I appreciate you being here. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate you being here. Thank you.